Hello everyone, I'm pleased to welcome you in this new interview of 30 Minutes With. 30 Minutes With is a series of interviews with African policymakers, activists, and on current African issues. We also have conversations with ordinary citizens out. So today we have a special issue discussing literary activism, and we are in Bristol, and I'll let you find out who our guests are.
Okay, thanks, Rama. Hello, my name's Ruth Bush. I'm a lecturer at the University of Bristol, where I teach in the School of Modern Languages, and I teach and research African literature, written in French and in English, and I work broadly on questions relating to publishing, book publishing, literary infrastructure, and these kinds of issues.
And you also are behind AWA, the exhibition on the first African women's magazine. I think it's good to do some publicity.
Okay.
For that.
Yeah, so this is a recent project which I work on with colleagues at the IFAN Institute in Dakar and at the Musée de la Femme Henriette Batilly, also in Dakar, and colleagues at the University of Montpellier in France. We've been working to digitize the first Francophone African women's magazine, which is called AWA, and which is freely available online.
Congrats for that. Joy, can you please introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you, Rama, for this awesome space. My name is Gaamangwe Joy Mogami. Everybody calls me Joy. Long story. I am the founding editor for Africa in Dialogue, which is an interview magazine that archives creative and critical insights by African storytellers, and also the coordinator for AMLA, which stands for Arts Managers and Literary Activists Network. Yes, I'm going to make it brief like that.
Can you just briefly tell us about Africa in Dialogue? What is it about?
Oh, okay. As I mentioned, it's an interview magazine that focuses on interviews with African storytellers, so writers, filmmakers, visual artists from all different parts of Africa and the world who are doing amazing work in their own different fields. So the magazine focuses on their work as well as issues that they explore in their own works. So, yeah, pretty much that.
That's great. Yeah. And Madhu?
Hi, thank you for having me, Rama, and for getting us all together today. My name is Madhu Krishnan. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol. I teach in the Department of English, and my own work is about African literature and cultural industries. I'm especially interested in the kind of distribution of capital and making of institutions and how that shapes literary culture. I also, this past year, was working on a project with Bwezije Mwezegire, who's the founder of AMLA and unfortunately can't be with us today. We co-edited this anthology, Odo Konyero, of short fiction by emerging Ugandan writers. So we have 18 writers from Kampala, Gulu, and Lira, all of them young people. And their stories are collected here to celebrate the 5th year of the Rightivism Literary Initiative.
And that is great. And I saw that you have also authored 2 monographs.
Yes.
Please tell us more.
So my first monograph was called Contemporary African Literature in English, Global Locations, Post-Colonial Identifications. And it was kind of thinking about the way in which kind of the contours of representation which are created through African literary writing, published both in the Global North and Global South. I have a second monograph that's just about to come out that's called Writing Spatiality in West Africa, and that's a comparative study of Anglophone and Francophone West African literature from 1950 to present. And then I have another book coming out that's called Contingent Canons, African Literature and the Politics of Location, that's looking at the kind of structures and mechanisms which have led to the canonization and consecration of African literature as a market category. But in the last chapter, thinking about a lot of the work that we've all been doing around literary activism and kind of independent production on the continent.
That looks fascinating. Congratulations. And Dzekashu McViban, can you please tell us more about yourself?
Thank you for the interview. So I'm Dzekashu McViban, a writer, editor and journalist, and the founder of BAKWA Magazine, which is a magazine of cultural and literary analysis. which aims at challenging the ways in which Cameroonians consume and produce literature. And a lot of what we do is focused on creating a space for both critical writing and creative writing. And recently we started BAKWA Cast, which is a conversational and intimate podcast which goes beyond our literary niche, the literary niche covered by BAKWA Magazine, and touches on things in a more wider way, like art, tech, policy, and social commentary. Yeah.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
So today we are going to discuss AMLA, which is the Arts Managers and Literary Activists Network, of which you are all members, I believe. So can you please tell us more about how it was founded? How did you come together to create this project?
So I can talk about that, I guess, since I was involved in the early formation of AMLA. Really, it came out of a series of discussions that were initiated by the founder of the AMLA network, Mwezijere, Ruth and myself and our colleague Kate Wallace, who is a lecturer at the University of Exeter, had known Mwezijere for a little while through various kinds of events, and kind of over the course of a series of conversations we realized that we had a lot of shared interests in thinking about the role of institutions and infrastructure in the shaping of African literary cultures. So Mwezijere, he's also one of the founders of the Center for African Cultural Excellence, and their work had been primarily around supporting creative writers on the continent, really supporting African writing. And one of the things they kind of discovered through this work is that while there are increasingly more platforms to support writers, there isn't actually that much that's done to support the people who enable writing to happen. So the kind of producers, the founders, you know, the people who do the different kinds of initiatives. And so that was sort of the spark for creating AMLA. In its first instantiation, we did a workshop at the 2016 Activism Festival. Ruth was there. Ruth, myself, and Kate Haynes-Wallace facilitated it, but we had speakers including Dzekashu, Edwidge Dro, Felwine Sarr, people from all over the continent, and we brought together about, I would say, 30 young, aspiring arts managers and literary activists from about 17 different African countries, Anglophone and Francophone. We also did a second workshop last year with Mwezijere, myself and Kate, and again we had people like Dzekashu, Billy Kahora, we had people from Ankara Review, kind of all over the continent sharing their expertise. And we also started working on trialing a mentorship where a kind of aspiring arts manager would be partnered with an established literary activist arts manager to help them kind of see their project through the next phase. And now Joy is the coordinator of AMLA with Mwezijere, their co-directors, and the kinds of things we've done, they've now turned into the AMLA Fellowship, which I think sounds like a great program.
Thank you.
What is AMLA Fellowship?
Okay. So the AMLA Fellowship, as she's already mentioned, is a combination of mentorship as well as face-to-face workshop that we're doing with arts curators and literary activists in Africa. And the idea of the fellowship is to provide support, a support system that is both emotional as well as practical for people who are starting their own literary initiatives or who are already there but they need more support. So we're very much interested in supporting arts curators in a very holistic manner. So we have the workshop, which is a 3-day event that's going to happen this August in Uganda. And after that, our fellows will also go through a 3-month mentorship, where now they can go further in depth in their own initiatives and just develop it, depending on which stages they're at, because the fellows that have already been selected are at different stages in their own initiatives. So some are starting, some are already there, and so they need different support. So that's where the mentorship is coming from. So it will be very individualized. Yes. So essentially that's what we want to do. We want to provide support for arts curators and also have a space for them to also interact with academic researchers and scholars in a different workshop that I guess you can also talk about, because we'll be running it concurrently at the same time. And the idea for that is because Boise J was inspired by the word is failing me. He noticed how there's no interaction between arts curators and academic researchers who are writing about literary production and literary initiatives. And we want to open a dialogue because that's missing, and it's important to also archive what arts curators are doing, literary activists are doing. And we feel that often enough we are not in the dialogue. There's a lot of support for creative writers, a lot of grants, opportunities, but little for arts curators and literary activists, and we want to create such a network that is independent, but also hopefully in the future can evolve to where we can actually provide much more than just workshopping and mentorship. Yes.
Yeah. And maybe must have been the first question I should have asked. What is literary activism, and what are the main challenges and promises maybe literary activists are facing? Maybe Dzekashu, since you are behind BAKWA, you could enlighten us.
Well, it depends on how you look at literary activism, because I'm not sure I would define myself as a literary activist. I would much more describe myself as somebody who solves problems. And looking at it from the Cameroonian perspective, there are writers don't have where to publish, so usually it leads to them giving up writing. So what we intended to do to solve this problem was to give them a space where they could publish, and BAKWA serves as that space. And it doesn't just end at the space where they can publish, it's also the kind of space where writers can network with each other and be aware of the wider opportunities which are available to them, because we're very interested in shaping them and opening them up to what is happening elsewhere. So if you look at it in that direction, literary activism is very much about providing a space for writers. It's about providing a space for writers, showing that writing is a profession and can be a lucrative profession. So that's my take on it.
Wow, that's great. Joy, do you have anything to add?
Literary activism. I think it was Boise Joe who said to me, he's like, if we look at the fact that at some point he was talking about African dialogue, that there wasn't something called African dialogue. And now that I have created it, I have in some way shaped culture. I have some way shaped the way that people perceive African storytellers and documenting and archiving African storytellers. So for me, when I started African dialogue, I wasn't thinking I'm being an activist at all. I was just like, I love talking to storytellers, so let me just do it. You know. But then it just became this organic thing that grew, and in some way, even though it wasn't a conscious thing, I am an activist. I am creating a space for writers to explore their work, to meditate on what they're doing, and also just broadening it to other issues as well that come with being an African writer, an African creative, right? So activism sometimes is not a very deliberate, intentional thing. I think a lot of art curators will tell you that I didn't know I was going to be an activist. I don't know why you're calling me that, but okay. Yeah, so there's a bit of that. Shaping culture.
Maybe also there's some deliberate initiatives around activism, like rightivism. YCGA is not here, but maybe you could speak in his behalf. Would you categorize rightivism as deliberate literary activism?
I think Boise Joe would have to answer that question for himself. I think there's something about isms, and it always sounds like it's associated with a definite program. But like Joy has just said, these things evolve through chance encounters, through luck, and through deliberate hard work. And it can often be really organic the way things happen. And certainly through a lot of my research is quite historical, looking at the history of Présence Africaine, the publishing house in in Paris, founded by Senegalese Alioune Diop. And he arrived, he had an idea in his head, but it evolves over time depending on the people who he happens to meet. You know, he happens to meet Senghor, and then, you know, things move on from that point forward. Yeah.
So AMLA, is it deliberate? And can you tell us about the two strands of AMLA, literary translation and creative writing? What exactly are you intending to do on those two, in these two areas?
Boyce J will be the perfect person to answer this. Is it deliberate? I think from my interaction with him and conversations with him, it was just a spark that happened where he realized there's something, a gap missing for arts curators, literary activists, as well as academic researchers and scholars. And he wanted to create a system or a space where they can interact, and then we can maybe take it from there. And so it's evolving. So the intention is evolving. Maybe right now I can say we are being intentional on how we want the network to be like. Yeah, so that might change, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So the two strands that we're doing. Right now we have two programs, which is the fellowship as well as the academic research. Madhu will later talk about it. And our focus, as I mentioned, is to just provide opportunities for these two entities, curators as well as academic researchers, to have a dialogue and to create work and publish that work as well. And then we will later evolve into that. So literary activism as well as creative writing are the things that we're exploring right now, and we're hoping to later grow into other aspects that come with being an art curator in Africa. But yeah.
I mean, I guess I could talk a bit about the workshop that Joy mentioned. So this year, while the AMLA workshop is running, we're going to have a second workshop running simultaneously, concurrently. And again, it's a shame that Kate's not here because she's really leading on that. But it's intended to be an academic writing workshop for early career scholars based on the African continent. So we'll have about between 15 and 17 early career academics who are all from different parts of the African continent, mostly East Africa, but we have some people coming from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, from elsewhere. And over the course of 4 days, we're going to be working with them, 4 or 5 days, I can't quite remember, on the process of writing academic, publishable, quality journal articles. We're going to write to them about, we're going to work with them on things like how to write grants to get funding. We're going to work with them on things like, you know, how to expand your network, how to work with practitioners. So it's really important that it happens at the same time as AMLA, I think, because as Joyce said, one of the things we're interested in is sort of developing and training around co-production between practitioners and academics, because really both sides are doing intellectual work of a certain type, and there's a lot of sort of cross-pollination, I think. So that's one of the things that we're doing this year, and some of the people who come along to that workshop will hopefully be published in a section of a special issue of the Journal of East African Literary and Cultural Studies, which is going to be dedicated to the theme of literary activism in 21st century Africa. So we're very lucky that the editors of the journal, Linda and Godwin, will be joining us at the workshop this summer in Kampala. But so I guess, you know, from our perspective as a partner of AMLA, the University of Bristol have been AMLA partners for a while now, our interest is really thinking about infrastructure and initiatives, and there I think Ruth can maybe talk about it in a minute, but we've just finished a bit of work around scoping and feasibility around the kinds of initiatives that currently exist in Africa for translation and creative writing. Because what we're trying to think about is, how do you build new institutions? How do you build new networks? How do you make something sustainable? So really just trying to feed into the work that AMLA does and support it as best we can.
And yeah, that was the next question. How do you build sustainable networks? And the recent feasibility study and scoping exercise that you did in many countries, I suppose, Senegal, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Kenya, Uganda, Zimbabwe. So what are your main findings, or is it too early to anticipate?
Well, tomorrow we're having
Okay.
a workshop where we're going to discuss the
Okay.
draft reports,
Okay.
which have been written by the 3 researchers who have been doing that research
Okay.
in these 3 countries. So it's a bit early to say what the main findings are at this point. But those researchers have been looking at creative writing initiatives and literary translation training initiatives. And I guess it's interesting to think about where those 2 things come into conversation, because often there is support for creative writers, but less support for literary translators, the people who do that really essential job, that work, and it's a creative task as well of carrying a piece of literature from one language to another language. I know Dzekashu was part of those conversations
Yes.
as a consultant on that work.
So Dzekashu was our country consultant for Cameroon. So he worked with our research assistant in West Africa was Dr. Georgina Collins. In East Africa we had Doseline Kiguru, and in Southern Africa we had TJ Dema. But I mean, you might be able to say a bit because you worked directly with Georgina really on helping her enter those networks.
Well, I think Georgina will be the best person to answer this, but what stood out the most with regards to literary translation, and it was very recurring in the conversations, was the fact that a lot of translators who are interested in literary translation don't do so because usually either they wouldn't find somebody to publish the work, or they wouldn't get a grant to translate the work. So it was all these discoveries and much more that are actually still being discussed.
I should mention the other countries, Côte d'Ivoire.
Okay,
Georgina went to Dakar, Abidjan and Yaoundé and did about 60 interviews with people, and the report will be published and freely available in due course, once we've discussed it tomorrow.
And likewise the other 2 reports from East Africa and Southern Africa will be published and freely available. One of the things that Joy and Buzzy have been doing with AMLA is, I think, trying to gather resources for people.
Okay. So if it's too early to talk about evidence, the research process itself, the project management itself, how was it to run a project from different metropoles, let's say, whether it's in the UK or Cameroon or Côte d'Ivoire? How is it to work together, to come together and work together and try and build sustainable network from different countries? How easy is it?
Working in these networks, it brings lots of satisfaction, but there are also big challenges, and I think the main one of those that comes to mind is the fact that Bwezije is not with us today because of the hostile environment that the UK presents to people who are applying for visas to come here, and this is a recurrent issue that we have with people who we would like to invite and have conversations with face to face, because WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter are amazing tools, but it's quite different to sitting in a room. This is the first time I've met Joy face to face this afternoon.
So you would say building sustainable networks starts with allowing people to really travel and move.
Yeah, I think it's true, and I think I just want to emphasize what Ruth said, particularly, you know, as a person whose academic research work really depends on co-production and collaboration. I think that there's a real issue in the United Kingdom where there's a real contradiction between the stated priority to fund research under the Global Challenges Research Fund, which necessitates movement and co-production and collaboration, and is completely undermined by the government's hostile environment policy that simply doesn't allow people to come. And I think it's a real shame. It's a real shame, and I think it's going to have really strong negative effects on the ability of the United Kingdom to be part of these conversations and networks moving forward.
Thank you. And then the next question, how do we decolonize the relationship between literary producers and global literary infrastructure, and at the same time respond to the need for more autonomous, local and continentally based enterprises, cultural enterprises? How do we address this contradiction?
Well, in a way, we've already answered this question because it's in setting up these partnerships with like-minded institutions and individuals that we, and here I'm quoting Tone Ejabe, it's very much by working together and establishing partnerships where we build a kind of independence from the mainstream way of doing things. Yeah, it's a paraphrase. But the question in itself, I mean, like if we had a clear-cut answer, we would have already. It's something that we are currently investigating. So I can't really give a clear-cut answer, but very much the first step to going about this is all these conversations, all this networking, all these partnerships, and this research.
It's a conversation that we keep going back to with BOICJ. Because as it stands, literary infrastructures and initiatives, as someone who's based in Africa, there's little support that exists for people who are doing work like mine. So most of the time the support is outside, and so it makes it a very tricky thing to do, to be independent African curators and have all the infrastructures and resources that you need to come from your continent and have that support. It's very difficult. So we have to find a way, which often is very organic, but I think at the core, if we're very intentional and aware that what matters is the work itself and how it's impacting people, then we can get to there. So the how is difficult. It's just more of, let's do it. Let's navigate it. Let's see where we're going to end up. So decolonizing is a process. It's ever evolving, I guess. Yeah.
Do you have anything to add, Ruth or Madhu?
No.
And what are your future projects? Where do you want to take AMLA?
Where do you want to take AMLA? Well, we would like to be a support system for arts curators and literary initiators. And what we want is to get to a point where the literary initiators and creators and activists are the ones who are supporting each other and finding ways to collaborate with each other, finding ways to produce whatever it is that they need to produce in a very independent way. It would be really great if we could get to a point where we can have grants for literary curators, don't you think?
Yeah,
that's what we want. That's one of our dreams. Yeah, because art curators are doing significant and important and relevant work, but there's little support that exists for them to continue doing the work that they need to do, that they desire to do. So if we could get to a point where we have that system, whether that's from our governments or other institutions outside that are interested in the kind of work that is being produced and put out by creators, then that would be really great. But AMLA for now just wants to support the art curator and the literary activist. Yeah.
Dzekashu? Future project? BAKWA?
Oh, yeah, I was about to ask if you're asking about AMLA's future projects. That was a bit confused there. So, right now, the project that we're working on is the podcast which we just launched, BAKWAcast, and we're also working on starting a publishing house. So it's going to be called BAKWA Books, and it's going to be an independent publishing house, and it's going to continue the mission that BAKWA Magazine has had so far, which has been to respond to notable lacunas in publishing in Cameroon, and BAKWA Books is going to focus mostly on creative writing and creative non-fiction, and we have a huge penchant for translation-based projects.
And how about the University of Bristol? Do you have any projects in the
Yeah, we're hoping to be able to take some of the findings from the scoping and feasibility study and potentially start a kind of translation summer school initiative in West Africa. So we've been talking about potentially next year doing a bit of scoping in Dakar, but also in Yaoundé and Abidjan to think about moving that forward. Yeah. And I think just carry on with our work, really. And I think it's been really exciting from my perspective to watch AMLA grow and evolve and develop into the shape it is now. So, you know, anything that we can do as an institutional partner to support that work, we will.
super grateful for that.
Is there anything you want to add, Ruth?
No, I don't think so. I think we're seeing how it goes, and we're looking forward to the workshop tomorrow and the conversations, and look out for the published reports and how these conversations move forward.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights about the AMLA program.